Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyday Politics with Laura May Lindo. I am your host, Laura May. And here we are on land that is held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people, right here on the Haldimand Tract. And when I was thinking about the conversation I'm about to have with Sharon Livingstone, she is the chair of the Cambridge Council on Aging. One of the very first thoughts I had was on the ways in which Indigenous communities have taught us to treat our elders. I don't know if the viewers, if folks that are tuning in know about the role that elders play in many Indigenous communities, but what I can tell you from my own experience is that there is a regard for the dignity, the wisdom, and the teachings that elders hold. And I often think about the difference between the way that Indigenous communities think about the place of older adults within their communities and the way that other communities think about that. Now, my parents are from Jamaica, and in many of the norms in our own family and my own traditions, elders hold a place of high regard. But what I've been noticing is, as I've been speaking a lot more and more, especially once I entered politics, as I started to speak about some of the system issues, things like homelessness, access to affordable housing or supportive housing, I started to realize that part of why we're seeing the gaps when it comes to older adults is because we've forgotten the wealth of knowledge and care and support that older adults have had for us. And if we would just take a moment to look back at the teachings that Indigenous communities from all across Turtle Island have shown us in the ways in which they hold elders with care, I feel like we would think differently about prevention methods and ways of ensuring that older adults age in place with dignity in the ways that they so deserve. And so I'm excited to have you join me and Sharon Livingstone for a conversation about the state of older adults, homelessness, and just a reminder that right now, older adults are simply not okay.
Your Region This Week takes you behind the headlines on issues and events shaping our community. Tune in for new episodes on Mondays at 7:30 p.m. and Fridays at 6 p.m.
Hello, welcome to Lions TV Bingo. An announcement, we are now on Mondays. Yes, every Monday from now on, Lions TV Bingo is going to be here on Rogers. We'll see you this Monday.
Wealth. The Royal City. Learn about the people, places, organizations, and events that make up your hometown. Join us each and every episode to learn more about wealth and what's happening in the Royal City.
Was that 4 or 5? He's lost count and still thinks he can drive. Do you think he knows that when he is caught and charged with impaired driving, he'll lose his license and a lot more? If he gets in his car, he'll face costs exceeding $20,000. Does he realize he could have a criminal record for his choice to drive? And it could be much worse if he crashes. I wonder what he'll be thinking tomorrow.
Have a Holden one at 15.
Visit arrivealive.org to find out more. Arrive Alive. Drive sober.
Hey, Chef D here. Join me Saturdays at 4:30 for At Home with Chef D, season number 10. Thanks so much for that. Hey, we're going to go back old school. We're going to join Julia Child and Graham Kerr and some of their great recipes and share some of their passion with you. At Home with Chef D, Saturdays at 4:30. Won't you join me?
Cooking with Chef D.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Sharon, thanks again for joining me. I'm really excited to have this conversation. It is so timely and so important.
It is.
So I'm going to jump right in. last week I was speaking to Marjorie Knight. She was talking to me about this idea of hidden homelessness. And I raised the point in time count where the 2024 data should have been collected. It was October 21st or 22nd?
21st, 22nd,
yeah.
23rd.
And so one of the questions that I had for you was whether or not you felt that that data was going to capture older adults that are navigating homelessness.
It certainly should. I sat actually on the point in time count, and it's also funded mostly by the federal government. And it's a fairly lengthy questionnaire. It asks people if they'll tell us how they came to be homeless, their age, where they're staying, roughly information like that. So yes, it should give us a better understanding of the number of older adults who are unhoused or living rough in their cars or in tents. We roughly know that about 29% of the unhoused population are older adults.
Sorry, say the percentage again?
29%.
29%.
So roughly how you calculate older adults in the sphere of housing and homelessness is 55 plus.
Okay.
So we'll be interested to see what the PIT count actually shows.
And what brought you to the committee? Like,
so I'm chair of the Cambridge Council on Aging, and I'm part of the Waterloo Region Age-Friendly Network. Because we're very concerned about housing and homelessness and older adults, we looked closely at the plan to end chronic homelessness and realized that there were in it only 2 references to seniors, which is a term we don't actually like. We prefer older adults.
Yeah.
So we raised our hands and said, could we be on some of your committees or your leadership co-creator team?
Yeah.
So I'm on both the PIT team and the committee that was looking to find warming places from about next week on into the winter. Last year, unfortunately, we had very few available. There were none in the townships, and there was none in Cambridge. And we know in the townships that a lot of older adults are homeless as well.
Now, you've been doing like advocacy in this area for quite some time, like well before the PIT counts were happening here. Are you seeing, when they do these counts, it was a question I had for Marjorie as well, when they do these counts, I know in theory they sound like they're really good because they're going to give you a sense of some of those trends, but are you seeing the policy changes to start to address those gaps?
Actually, what we saw from the last count was a bit of more money flowing into the region for services, so that was a good thing. That came through the federal government. What we're hoping this time that the count will show is a better understanding of why people are becoming homeless.
Okay.
We know that for older adults, often it can be the death of a partner or the partner going into long-term care. Just let me backtrack a bit. 15 years ago, when we started doing the work to make Cambridge an age-friendly city, we interviewed a lot of people and talked with a lot of people. And at that time, 35% of the older women living in Cambridge were living in poverty.
Oh, okay.
And we can only assume that number has increased.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, as a gerontologist, I get a little tired of the fact that there's an assumption that all older adults have resources and family. And that's just not true.
Yeah. Well, we were seeing a lot of that too during the pandemic. Like when I was still at Queen's Park, I remember hearing these stories in long-term care. Like folks were lonely.
Yes.
And there was this assumption that, well, their families would pick up the slack. Their families would be the advocates for them in those spaces. Before, when we were talking about you coming on and chatting with me about homelessness and older adults, you had referenced a book, which I want to thank you for, The Late Life Homelessness, Experiences of Disadvantage and Unequal Aging by Amanda Grenier.
Yes, an excellent book.
So this book, for those that are watching, it was published in 2021, and I'll make sure that there's a link to details about the book as well. But one of the things that you just said touched on a point that I pulled out, like right at the start. She says, this book uses a critical gerontological perspective to argue that late life homelessness is an experience of unequal aging.
Yes, exactly.
Unequal aging. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, that goes back to my point about not all older adults have a lot of resources and not all older adults have family. And those two pieces before we even look at being unhoused, lead to that unequal aging.
Yeah.
It's from that group that we usually see the major increases in use of the food bank, for example.
Okay.
And recently, and I represent that it was only one case that was found, but family doctors have been put on notice to check older adults for scurvy, because they're finding, they found scurvy in an older woman who wasn't eating properly.
Oh my gosh.
So again, unequal aging.
Yeah.
But really, the other part of that is we're aging well into later life.
Yeah.
So I'm 81 and we're aging well into our hundreds.
Yeah.
And so the other piece of this that fits with housing is that the regional wait list for people over the age of 65 is well over 1,500 people who are waiting. But there's a whole bunch ahead of them who aren't moving out and aren't ready to go.
Yeah.
And so there's this long wait list for rent geared to income housing in every area, not just this region.
You know, it's so important that you raise these kinds of issues. So again, it's something that I've been hearing more and more as I've been speaking to different people about totally different issues. But everything is interconnected. Like you can't address what's happening with older adults in our communities if you don't pay attention to them when you're creating your housing strategies. And I worry sometimes that we're not having enough conversations where those dots are being connected.
You need to allow older adults, like you want youth to co-design programs. Well, here, let me say this out loud. We want older adults to co-design programs.
Yeah. So talk to me about that. Let's say so I actually have two separate questions, but I think they might be the same question, but we're just follow me. Let's see what happens. So you had mentioned that you realized that older adults were not being mentioned in some of the policy documents or what we were imagining as
well, in this major policy document to end chronic homelessness in the region, seniors were mentioned twice.
Okay, so we start off there where we're not mentioning the folks, right? And so you had mentioned that you and the group that you're working with were putting yourselves on these kinds of committees. So my first question is actually, which committees are you putting yourself on?
Okay.
And my second question, sort of as a follow-up, is what kinds of resources or changes in those policies are you folks advocating for in those spaces?
Okay, so I was on the pit count committee and on the warming center committee.
Okay.
3 other folk from the Age Friendly Network have been on the co-creators leadership table, and I'm sorry, I apologize, I'm not sure if I have all the right language, but I think that leadership table has led to other meetings of the leadership group.
Okay.
There are at least 110 people on the co-creators leadership table for this report. And to be honest, we've been very privileged to work with the regional staff. They've been very accommodating to allow us to be on these committees, and we're appreciative of that. But we felt quite strongly that the voice of the older adult was not being heard and needed to be.
Are you finding that that is unique to this region, or is that silencing something that you're sort of noticing across the province or across the country? Like, it's a bigger problem?
It's a bigger problem than just any region. I sit on the Age Friendly Southern Ontario Network and the Ontario Councils on Aging, and it's an issue, to some extent it's an issue of ageism. And the other part of that is we really need to get our heads through the fact that older adults need to be involved in the design of those programs if you want them to be successful. One of my points, for example, on the warming center committee was, please don't expect older adults to lie on a mat on the floor. Please provide a small frame bed or a cot or something that's a little easier. And also make sure that the facilities you're using have washrooms that are adapted. Not just for older adults, but for anybody else who might actually have a disability or need them.
So interesting too, because I'm often telling people, if you think of your program design with the most vulnerable in mind, literally everybody else wins, right?
Yes.
Because there are other people that you may not have been thinking about that are going to benefit from changes that are implemented in that way, right?
And we've made strides. Like, I began my career working with disabled youth and then working with disabled adults. And we worked hard to make sure they were involved in those co-designs. We need to work just as hard to make sure that the aging population is included.
One other thing that I just wanted to flag for folks was the when you're saying older adults, again, going back to like what we're imagining in our minds, 55, you said was the bottom end of that older adult category, right?
It is within the housing spectrum, yes.
And so are you also finding, because 55, like these could be families, right? Where people at the helm, they've got, especially now when you see the kinds of pressures in post-secondary, we're hearing stories of a lot of older, young adults that are still living at home, right?
Yes.
So are you also seeing any kinds of shifts in like families being counted in that PIT count?
They would be counted in the PIT count. We're also seeing grandparents raising grandchildren being counted in that count.
In that count?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, so before we move in, I want us to actually spend some time talking about what these structural issues are that are preventing older adults from aging with grace and dignity in the way that they should. But before we do that, I would like to offer you a snack.
Well, I can't talk and eat.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we'll take a quick break. We'll take a quick break. So we will be right back right after this break.
On Rogers TV.
Your Region This Week takes you behind the headlines on issues and events shaping our community. Tune in for new episodes on Mondays at 7:30 p.m. and Fridays at 6 p.m.
Hey folks, it's me, Giovanni Petiti, the host of Not Tonight. It's the new late night talk show right here on Rogers TV. We got fabulous guests, a lot of laughs. It's just like the Jimmy Kimmel Show. If you order the Jimmy Kimmel Show on Wish. So join me Sunday at 10 o'clock right here on Rogers TV. Nice.
Hello, I'm Liz Dowdswell, Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. In 2008, carbon monoxide, a deadly invisible gas, killed an entire family in our province. That tragedy led to a new law requiring homes with potential CO sources to have alarms. John Gignac's family members passed away that day, and he shares his story to save others.
Please make sure you have working CO alarms in your home. Protect your family today.
For me, it all started here.
I do my best work here.
Scores! Oh my goodness! This guy's dangerous from here, here, and here.
We're watching history in the making here.
Are you watching this?
And our fans are up here.
I'm here for it. It's all about what's up here and what's in here.
Sportsnet, here for hockey.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Sharon, right before the break, we were speaking a little bit based on Amanda Grenier's book, Late Life Homelessness, Experiences of Disadvantage and Unequal Aging. Folks that are watching, I'm repeating the title of the book because I strongly recommend that you try and get your hands on the book. It is rare to have a book that's talking about homelessness later in life, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And we were saying this actually even before the taping. Like, are there a lot of resources that talk about late life homelessness in the Canadian context or across?
No, there are not. There are not. There are some coming out now, some papers being produced as people are doing some research on, but this has become an explosive issue in the last year or so.
And especially because now we're doing more of the counting, so the data is pointing to this as a key issue.
It's not just that, but it's also the fact that shelters are full and they're struggling to know how to deal with folk who have maybe medical issues and aging issues combined. I mean, one of the things this region did that was terrific was set up at the Preston Kinsman Center with the Cambridge Shelter a program where we could have older adults with those kinds of issues stay in that setting as opposed to staying in a larger facility.
So it's like, and it's thinking about it with this wraparound care model, right? So you're thinking of everything that the folks need.
Yes, exactly.
So before the break, I had quoted, and in Grenier's book, she talks about unequal aging, and that led us into a space where we have an opportunity to talk a little bit more, unpack this notion of systemic issues. So what I have noticed in my own work is that oftentimes I'll say, okay, this system isn't working, or this approach to addressing this big issue isn't working. There's a system problem, there's a systemic issue, and people will nod, but I'm not entirely certain that we spend the time being critical about what systems aren't working. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that. So when Grenier is talking about unequal aging, when you're talking to me about certain things that aren't working for older adults that would land them into a situation where they're having to seek a shelter later in life, what are the system issues that could cause that?
Well, one of the ones I mentioned earlier is the fact that there's a huge wait list in every region for older adults wanting rent-geared to income housing. And we do not have enough of that, and we do not have enough supportive housing. Yeah. So for example, in Cambridge, we have 20 beds for supportive housing on the second floor of the bridges, thanks to really clever thinking on the part of the people who founded the bridges. But that's a very small amount of supportive housing for a large urban area. We need far more supportive housing across all parts of the province. That's one systemic issue.
Yeah.
The other is around finances. So people who know me well know that I'm absolutely dumbfounded by the fact that most of the world thinks older adults have lots of money and family. And that's just not accurate. Yeah. We know that about half of older adults don't have enough income. If they're on the base level of OAS, CPP, and GIS, there's barely enough money there to rent. Yeah. And as I said before, if a partner dies or goes into long-term care, that person will be evicted.
I had seen, I wish I had it in front of me actually, my aunt had sent me something from CARP that she had received that was talking about potential, I feel like there were changes to CPP or something like that. Have you heard of any of that?
There's some boost to OAS happening in the next quarter.
Okay.
For those who qualify from filing their income tax. So there's another unequal issue. A lot of older adults don't always know to file income tax. We try to get the information out across the region for income tax clinics, but again, that's an issue of making sure people file their income tax so that they're eligible for all of the benefits that might be available.
And so the other thought that I had was around what's available in those shelters. So you would talk to us a little bit about that. If an older adult in the neighborhood ends up having to access a shelter, what are the kinds of barriers that they might be experiencing right now?
Well, we're lucky in the Cambridge shelter has an elevator, and there are some separate rooms available in the House of Friendship shelter on Weber Street. At this point in time, there are no beds available for women, except possibly through a motel.
Okay.
Until the YW in Cambridge opens their emergency shelter, we are without any location to send women to.
It's funny because that came up, not funny, haha, but funny like I don't understand what is happening around me.
Trust me, not very many of us do.
Honestly, this came up again in the interview with Marjorie.
Yes.
And somebody had circulated, I think it was a petition, and I had signed this petition last week. And I'll be sure, I'll leave the link for the petition up in the resources on the website on this interview as well.
Okay.
But I honestly, I was dumbfounded to find out that was the case, right? But one of the reasons why I keep bringing us back to these system issues, you've spoken about things like what benefits, and I'm using benefits very loosely, what benefits are available. I know Marjorie had mentioned this, and I wonder if you feel the same way, but her take was the benefits that are available are well under the amount that one would need to survive month to month anyway.
Yes.
right?
Yes. I mean, we're looking at apartments renting in this region for $1,600 plus hydro. And there's no way, if your income is less than $30,000, that you're able to manage on that. And this is why we've also seen a huge increase in older adults using the food bank.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny too, because I remember when I was at Queen's Park, my colleague, Dr. Rima Burns-McGowan, she was fighting for a poverty strategy, like a poverty reduction strategy in the province, which at the time, I think we got an 8-page document that said they were working on it. But I had questions, like what kinds of, where I'm moving, just for those that are following this conversation, we talk about the system issues, but part of what happens when we're talking about the system issues is that we're opening up an opportunity to really think about prevention, as opposed to fighting for Band-Aids and funding that's emergency funding that will disappear without anybody addressing those root causes. I get worried when we don't have that conversation. But what can that poverty reduction strategy look like then?
Well, and social planning councils across the province have been fighting to include older adults in poverty discussions.
Yeah.
And for a very long time, that has been an uphill battle. Not sure why. As I said, there's this long-standing perception that all older adults have lots of resources and families.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a reluctance to actually figure out, even though Stats Canada publishes the level of older adult poverty in a region, people seem to have trouble getting their minds through that.
I think there's also like a desire to ignore the gap between when you are an adult and when you're in like long-term care or at the end of life at that end. Like there's a lot of living that happens in between all of that.
So just financially, just to pick up on that, when you're into long-term care, you only get a small allowance set aside. The rest of your pension money goes to the support of the long-term care facility.
Oh my gosh. And it's the other thing that I realized, again, when I was an elected member and we were navigating the pandemic, that was a moment, it was eye-opening for me because I had never actually thought about long-term care. Like my parents are from Jamaica, and there we often, I remember my mom struggling because they had been in Canada for a long time. My grandfather had passed, and my grandmother, the siblings decided they had no choice but to put her into long-term care, but that went against everything they knew culturally, but nobody could afford to do anything else. But then I remember in their search for long-term care homes, and then I add that to what I learned as an elected member, like some homes are charging you for toothpaste and, you know, or they're asking, what was the other thing that was strange? They would ask family, going back to your point, to come in when nursing staff was missing.
Yes, to come in often to help with feeding or to help with toileting. What we're seeing now in long-term care, and I think COVID changed some of this, but is that the ask to families now is, can you hire private PSWs to come in to support your family member in case you can't be there, but also to ensure that somebody's there all the time. And I'm meeting families who are spending $8,000 and $9,000 a month in purchasing extra support.
Well, and in the world where all of the costs around us are rising and people are already struggling to make ends meet, that additional expense could be literally what lands you in this point in time count. Like that, right?
Yes.
So the other question that I had for you was if you could spend a little bit of time speaking about home care and what's happening there, because again, I remember when I was at Queen's Park, there were discussions about, you know, long-term care is expensive. That's not where we want to be putting people. We want to make sure that individuals in our community can age in place.
Yes.
What kinds of supports are available to make that happen?
Less now than there ever have been. So I sat on a provincial committee to develop a new basket of service for older adults and anyone else who needed home care, and that included and still includes people who are disabled who may need support at home as well. That was just prior to the Liberal government being defeated, and at that time we had come up with 8 baskets of care, which would have kept most people at home up to and including palliative care at home.
Oh, wow.
That was it was an amazing committee to work with. There were people from all over the province on it, and we did really good work. And sadly, it didn't last. What we're seeing so 10 years ago when my husband was dying at home, I had a conversation with him that we were going to buy home care at some point. We were living in the country, which makes getting reliable care a little more challenging. And I knew that there would be a point at which neither my children would be available or I could do the lifting. So we had set it up, and that happened, and it happened for 6 weeks till he passed away. And that cost me almost $1,200 then.
Oh my gosh.
So I can only imagine what it's costing people today to provide support to individuals aging at home who need that level of care. But what we're seeing this last 2 weeks is for those people who are palliative or need extra care at home, have need for equipment and materials, they're not coming. They're not getting the materials they need to keep people at home safely.
Yeah.
One lady was ordering her materials from Amazon.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Because the bandages and the equipment she needed weren't being delivered.
Yeah. The home care issue, for those that are watching again, I'm going to make sure that there's some links to information around home care. Do you know if were there any reports from that particular committee, like at the end when they were
Yes,
putting
I
things
think
together?
there's one still on the internet if you look for it.
Okay,
you can find it.
I'm going to see if I can actually dig it up, because the other piece of this that I want folks to know is that yes, these reports often land on somebody's shelf and gather dust. We often talk about that. But at the same time that they're gathering dust, we as advocates outside of the system can demand that they pull these reports back up, dust them off, and get to work.
There are 50,000 people waiting for long-term care beds. And if we don't improve, and they're trying to build more long-term care beds. Again, that got stalled with the change of governments. But the reality is most older adults want to age in place. They want to stay at home. And if we can facilitate that with a better home care system, then I think we should be doing that.
Well, and I think one of the tensions that we're seeing, and I've heard it in a variety of sectors, is that even in moments, I know at one point the federal government was looking at, if they haven't already done it, but they were looking at implementing some kind of an older adult strategy, like a federal...
Still waiting to see
We're still waiting to see it, right? Well, there's an election coming, so there we go. But there was this discussion about this big strategy and whatever, but oftentimes, even when the federal money comes in, the challenge ends up being that, okay, well, we heard the money went somewhere, but we can't seem to get the provincial government to disseminate said funding into the places that we need.
The federal government, post-COVID, did come up with a committee that worked on new standards for long-term care, and they did bring those down, but they weren't implemented.
Wow. And there's more questions. I have questions, and one of my questions is, where is the accountability mechanism in the midst of all of this? Because it's taxpayer dollars that are being used or being stalled. What is going on?
I have no clear answer for you.
Solve all my problems. No?
No. I can only provide suggestions of how we can do better.
Well, so before we take another break, I was going to sort of tie it back in. There's another article that I'm going to make sure is available for anybody who's watching. This one is through the Canadian Medical Association Journal, and it's entitled Tackling Late Life Homelessness in Canada. The researchers are Jillian, Alston, Stefan, Baral, Orkin, and Sharon Straus. And I pulled a quote from the article. Again, it was the way that they were framing it. Many older adults experience homelessness in Canada, yet current shelters and temporary housing are not designed or resourced for them. And so I know you've spoken a little bit about it, but I'm wondering if you can sort of reiterate some of the specific resources that would be needed in shelters and in temporary housing initiatives so that we can better support older adults.
So what I would like to see happen, if we had an absolute way to do this, would be to move people who are unhoused directly into supportive housing.
Yeah.
So they would have wraparound services. I mean, the fact that the Preston Kisman Center has been able to move older adults there out of a larger shelter system is excellent. We need to work on the fact that these older adults are very traumatized.
Yeah.
A lot of older adults never expected to be homeless, and this is the first time they've been homeless. We had an 89-year-old gentleman using the Preston Kinsman Center last year. He was an artist. Oh. But with the increase in evictions and rental evictions, we are seeing a horrific increase in older adults becoming homeless, and often for the first time.
Yeah, and you know what, folks? This is, again, this is an example in a lesson in ageism, right? Because we've had conversations about rent evictions. I remember being at Queen's Park having conversations about rent evictions, but for some reason the language around rent evictions was different when we were speaking about whole buildings where it was older adults that were in them versus other spaces where folks were being rent evicted. And to me, it's those, again, it's these weird assumptions that we have and that we're working with.
So what people don't often understand is that 51% of older adults have been lifetime renters.
Yeah.
And we have this assumption in our heads that everybody owns a house.
Yeah.
And that's not true.
And that at that point in their life, they're not paying a mortgage. There's another assumption that we often have, right? Like that they own it, they've paid off their mortgage,
right.
they're good. Which means that any kind of support that they would need, they should be able to have that money just waiting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on that happy note, we're going to take another break, and then we'll be right back. So we will be right back in just a moment.
Every year, dozens of Canadians are killed or seriously injured because they take risks around railway tracks. Talk to your loved ones about rail safety. Visit stoptracktragedies.ca.
Hello, welcome to Lions TV Bingo. An announcement, we are now on Mondays. Yes, every Monday from now on, Lions TV Bingo is going to be here on Rogers. We'll see you this Monday.
Wealth, the Royal City. Learn about the people, places, organizations, and events that make up your hometown. Join us each and every episode to learn more about wealth and what's happening in the Royal City.
Sundays for Pairs is a service that we believe will help you discover more of God's promises and purpose for your life. A reminder that God is for you. Courtesy of Pairs Community Church. Join us every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. on Rogers TV to be encouraged and pointed towards hope.
In para-hockey, the ice tilts in favor of men. But that will never stop us.
United by passion, battling for equity. We are the National Women's Para-Hockey Team of Canada.
We're here.
We're hungry.
We're ready.
Ready to inspire.
Ready to leave our legacy.
Ready to be supported and make history. It's our time. Are you ready?
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I'm going to jump into the last set of questions that I have for you, and it's going to be a bit of a throwback. So in 2020, when I was still a member of provincial parliament for Kitchener Centre, I had tabled a bill, it was Bill 196, and it was calling for a seniors advocate. And I think I raised this with Marjorie as well, because we had modeled that piece of legislation on BC's Seniors Advocate, which seemed to be doing good work. And the goal of this advocate was to be independent of government and to provide support. So wherever it was within the plethora of systems that the government oversees, that an older adult would experience any kind of issues, this person could help to better that system.
Right.
It went to second reading. And so it went to committee, but the government didn't bother to call it, so it died at the end of that session. In 2023, MPP Lise Vaugeois and myself, we tabled it again. So it was the exact same legislation with a new title, Advocate for Older Adults Act, and that was 2023. For some reason, the government actually did not pass it. Like they did not even send it to second reading. They voted against it, which to be honest, I was doing some research about this and I was kind of shocked. But what I was hoping you could speak a little bit about was why, or if you think that that type of an advocate is a worthwhile endeavor for us to try and have, and what kinds of change you think they could be helping us to create here.
Well, I think advocates on any level are wonderful. When we were first working on the age-friendly work for the City of Cambridge, one of the things that we had thought about was an advocate from the city for older adults. Wow. We also I'm very impressed with the UK ombudsperson for older adults. In fact, I'm impressed with the entire country of Ireland, which is age-friendly. So the more work we do to become age-friendly, the better it will be for all older adults. If we could have provincial advocacy, that would be wonderful. Yeah. We have a group in Toronto, the Elderly Centre for Advocacy, who have dealt with a lot of issues around elder abuse and scams and things like that. Yeah. And they're excellent. They've been around for a great many years. So any kind of advocacy that will help is wonderful.
Actually, I will have, for those watching, the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly, I have a link to their homepage and also to their legal services. Great. Just in case people are experiencing anything and they need help, I just wanted to make sure they had the direct.
Well, our Waterloo Legal Clinic here also does terrific work with the older adults around evictions and renovictions that they've been dealing with recently.
Okay, I'm going to add that to the list of resources as well. This is just sort of a follow-up. I'm going to look for the UK ombudsperson just to see. But I know that we have like an age-friendly, there's a desire to have an age-friendly approach to the work that's happening in the region and whatever it is that we're doing in the region. Is that coordinated outside of the region? Like, are you feeling like the province is operating from a place that is age-friendly, or that is a thing?
Not the provincial government so far, except that they coordinate the Ontario Age-Friendly Southern Ontario Network, which is a network for those of us doing this work across the Southern Ontario, and brings in some people from the north as well. The Councils on Aging have another group called the Ontario Councils on Aging, and we also meet and talk about these issues and try to advocate. We do a lot of writing of op-eds and putting information and letters to the editor from that group.
Okay, and are you feeling like that, are you seeing the kind of change that you hope that those letters should be making?
Well, my desire for change, anybody who knows me will know I expected it yesterday, so no, the answer is probably not quickly enough. And my feeling is there has been change, but it isn't big enough or quick enough.
Okay.
And I think the one that concerns me the greatest at this point in time is home care, and the other piece is supportive housing. And they're kind of tied together because we know that an enormous number of older adults want to age in place. Yeah. And we can't do that without those kinds of resources.
Absolutely. It's interesting because I do think that I need to have a show where all I do is sit with paper and a pen and start writing letters and like just have people write letters with me, because the supportive housing, the call for supportive housing, until I had spoken to you, because we had met in a different space with the Waterloo Region Community Foundation.
Yes.
And even in that conversation, I realized that a lot of the supportive housing conversations I was having at Queen's Park, they were not using the language age-friendly, and they weren't talking about older adults. Older adults, the conversations at the Queen's Park level, when I was there at least, seemed to always be long-term care and home care, but long-term care first, and then it was advocates that were like, hello, how about we, prevent before we go there?
Yes. Not a surprise, because there's 50,000 people on the wait list for long-term care, that it's an issue for provincial governments. But the bigger issue is to keep people at home and well, so that they can avoid having to use long-term care.
Yeah, and when I think about the ways in which we need to start connecting the dots, like with all of these different issues that we're talking about, having that age-friendly approach is really important.
Yes.
There was something else that you had said actually during one of the breaks around trauma-informed. I think we were talking about it actually, maybe it was before the interview even started. But even that lens isn't necessarily age-friendly.
No, it's not, but it's necessary that it be trauma-informed staffing so that they can deal with older adults who are being rehoused, if that happens, and or go into supportive housing. We had an event last April in where we had Brian Paul from Supportive Housing Waterloo, who talked about the essential need for staff to use a trauma-informed approach, bringing people into supportive housing. We've heard that from other groups as well. And it probably makes a lot of sense, since for a lot of older adults, they have never been without housing until they're much older.
Well, and part of the way that I've understood systemic issues like ageism, for instance, a lot of what you're struggling with are stereotypes that people have, and people often think the stereotypes are just negative, but sometimes it's like the bar that they have raised for you. So the assumption that an older adult in 2024 owns their home and is doing fine is really difficult to hold when you are struggling, paycheck to paycheck. OAS and CPP is like your primary income. So that's not a benefit if that's all that you have. That's not a benefit in the way that we think about it. But part of the trauma comes from the tension between what you are experiencing and what the world says you're supposed to be experiencing.
And the world suggests that everybody should also have access to a private pension plan. And we know that for a lot of older women whose husbands worked in certain manufacturing industries, the pension dies with him. So it doesn't come to her, or you get only a portion of it. We have a lot of interesting fallacies that we base a lot of information on.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to older adults, the way that the program began with a land acknowledgement talking about the way in which we need to honor elders, I sometimes think about the lack of dignity and care that we have for elders who literally have built all the things that we are now fighting about.
Yes, exactly.
And using, but also fighting about, right?
And a great many older adults are strong advocates. I meet an enormous number of people who are doing just what I'm doing, advocating strongly for change.
Yeah, which is interesting too, because there's another paradox, right?
Yes.
Because we're in our mind, we're like, oh, all the older adults, they're doing fine. They're just sort of chilling. They're watching television, whatever they're doing, right? But really, they're putting themselves on committees right now to ensure that other older adults are also provided with care.
Yes.
Well, one of the last questions that I have for you in this sort of umbrella of questions is coming back to this advocate, because what I'm trying to do is make sure that I give folks that are watching tools to advocate for something that would be useful in making the change that we seek. What kinds of advocacy strategies, or like what kinds of things would you want to see in the office of this independent advocate? If we could just imagine that it existed,
one of the things I'd like to see is that they put a lot of attention into helping older adults who live in condominium setups or apartments to develop naturally occurring retirement communities. So NORCs are more popular now than they have been made more visible. And we've seen groups in condominiums and apartment buildings and in other large settings where there's groups of older adults, that they can take this and develop it. There's a group out of Toronto that got access to an unused school to hold their meetings.
Oh, wow.
A mutual friend of ours is trying to set up one in her apartment building using the community center. At its utmost, they also bring in paramedics to do medical follow-up with the people in those buildings. So to maybe do blood pressure checks or something like that. Again, building in information and help that will keep people at home.
This is it, because we're back to, as opposed to fighting for the Band-Aid, let us fight for prevention. Yes. Like make sure that everything that folks need is available to them before they end up having to figure out our shelter system or figure out.
And also given that it's so difficult for people to get to doctors or even to have a doctor, this type of community medicine will also help keep people healthy longer.
Well, and then that brings us to another one of those dots, right? Because actually this had come up I had 2 episodes where I was speaking about supervised consumption sites and the government's decision to have those close.
Yes.
And that had also come up, that if you make certain decisions, there will be an impact on the healthcare system, which is also overburdened.
Yes.
We heard that in the conversations around long-term care when more and more people were realizing what was happening in long-term care. And we hear that from advocates, like with nurses and doctors and all of the medical staff that are talking about this. But if we don't do the prevention piece, then we overburden all the other systems.
Exactly.
Well, listen, what I'd like to do before I let you go, it's kind of my favorite part because I'm an eternal optimist. I am. I talk about all the hard things, but at the same time, I think it's so important for us to articulate and speak into the universe what it is that we want to see. And so if you could snap your fingers and make one systemic change, one system change, what would it be?
A much better home care setup so that older adults can age in place and not have their families burdened with purchasing multi-hours of private home care, or again, not being able to age in place and being on the list of 50,000 people waiting for long-term care.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think what I'm going to do is ask my lovely producer, David, to clip all of the people's responses to snap your fingers so that we can just have one show that's just like happy, right? And we put into the world what it would look like. Because what I'm seeing is we're speaking about the things that young people need all the way up to the things that our elders need. Yeah. So I just want to, before I let you go, say thank you for all of the work that you're doing in community, not just for being here, but literally for putting yourself into all of the right spaces to make sure that there is a voice for older adults in our communities. I'm really grateful to you for that.
Thank you, Laura May. It matters a great deal, and thank you for doing this.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, and we will be right back after this break.
On Rogers TV.
Do you like talk radio? Catch a televised simulcast of The Mike Farwell Show. Listen to callers rant or rave. Watch interviews with guests on topics impacting your community. The Mike Farwell Show, weekdays from 10 till noon on Rogers TV.
Hi, I'm Stacey Bester, the host of Sweet Occasions here on Rogers TV. I'm so looking forward to season 7, where we're serving up both sweet and savory dishes. I hope you'll tune in and enjoy all of the flavors that we have for you. And don't forget to make every day a sweet occasion.
Welcome to Lions TV Bingo. An announcement, we are now on Mondays. Yes, every Monday from now on, Lions TV Bingo is going to be here on Rogers, and we're off like a herd of turtles. Roll 29. 4 $500 prizes, one $3,500 prize, all the trivia you can imagine, and some of my bad jokes. We'll see you this Monday.
Welcome back, folks, and thank you again for tuning in to Everyday Politics with Laura May Lindo. I am so grateful for the resources that Sharon shared with us. So that means that this week the resource list is going to be plentiful. I will make sure that you have access to a link to the Cambridge Council on Aging, so you can get a sense not only about what they provide, the services that they provide, but also you can follow them on Facebook. I'll make sure to connect you there. I'm also going to connect the Advocacy Center for the Elderly to the resource list. And as I said during the interview, there will be a link to the homepage so you can get a sense of what services they offer, but also a direct link to their legal services page so you can have some help if you do need it or if somebody that you know needs it. I'll also make sure to keep it local, so the Waterloo Region Community Legal Clinic will also be linked in case you have some advocacy needs on that end. As Sharon said, they do provide some of that support, so be sure to check that out. I will also make sure that there is a link to Amanda Grenier's book, The Late Life Homelessness Experiences of Disadvantage and Unequal Aging is the name of that book, published in 2022. So I'll make sure that you have access to that. And there was an article that I also mentioned from the Canadian Medical Association Journal, Tackling Late Life Homelessness in Canada. I will also make sure that you have a link to that. Finally, there was a slew of petitions that I'm going to try and dig up. I'm going to see if I can find a petition to the petition to end chronic homelessness. There's a local petition about that, and so I'll be sure to make sure that it's connected here, as well as lead you to Ontario Council on Aging. And if there are other supports or resources that might be helpful, I'll make sure to add them. Oh, you know what else I'll add? I'm going to add a link. I'll keep the link up for the Seniors Advocate. So if anybody watching is inclined to start advocating to have us pull up that old legislation and make it law in Ontario, after hearing all of the important information that Sharon shared with us about the state of older adults in the region and across this province and across the country, then by all means, we don't have to start from scratch. We can actually pull the old legislation and make it law. So don't forget to follow me on Instagram at everydaypolitics_official, and I cannot wait to see you next time.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
Hey, we're Chris and Kim.
We are the hosts of What's Buzzin' Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. on Rogers TV.
We're going to chat about what's trending, interview some awesome guests, and just get to hang out with you. We're in your living room, having a blast on a Wednesday, And Cameron might bully me a little bit too.
Slightly.
That could happen too, because that's what we do.
Just because I'm here.
Yeah, and that's Wednesday nights on Rogers TV. Let's do this.
Your Region This Week takes you behind the headlines on issues and events shaping our community.